back to the slides. Great. Thanks, Andrew. What we'll also do is welcome to those people watching post live session. We know, for example, there's a watch event planned in Australia at some point in the coming weeks. I've lost track as to when. I actually don't think we've organised it yet. So yeah, welcome first of all to RDA. Do we have anyone in the room, in the virtual room, that for whom this is their first plenary?
That's actually one of the questions. We're not
Yeah,
asking the question
yeah.
yet.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Sorry. Anyway, so welcome to those who are new. And just a reminder, and I know for me particularly, one of the benefits of working within the RDA framework is the guiding principles that mean that we've got this governance kind of safe space to support our conversations. And also kind of assuming you're probably all members, but if you're not, do join. And as an individual member, it's free, so that's cool too. Certainly provided this particular interest group with a real space to bring people together and bring people into RDA. I'd say that probably haven't been there before, because they've found a community that's doing things relevant to their areas of interest. So on to the next slide, I think, Andrew. So agenda for today's session, we're fairly fluid. So we'll give you some updates. We're trying to make it interactive because what we don't want this to be is Andrew and I talking at you for the entire session. We will recap about how the group came to be because we know we've got a couple of new people in the session today. Feel free to interject, shout out. I think we've got a small enough group that's probably going to be fine. I think we've got 10 people, but do put your hand up if you feel like you're not being heard. We want to make sure that everyone has the chance to have a say today. We'll talk about the work that we've done over the last 3 or 4 months, which has been huge amount of work, and talk about some use cases and then try and get some ideas from people in the room to move this work forward.
Sorry, Jenny.
That's all right.
Every time I click a link, it is opening in the window that the slideshow is in for some reason. So
Okay, no worries. All good. So there we go. Community
we should be
feedback,
back. Are we?
discussion,
All right.
and mapping use cases. I think that's the other thing too. I know we've got some representatives from other RDA groups who have some alignments with our areas of interest. And so thank you for joining. And if you want to step in and say a little bit about what you're doing when we get to that point, that would be great. Okay, so I think, Andrew, on to the next slide. Yeah, I think let's start with this. So word claps are a little bit Menti-like. If people, hopefully, I'm sure you all have a phone to hand. If you could copy that link to get into the word clap, and then yeah, that's the first step, isn't it? And then we go on to some questions. Just we thought we'd try and wake you up, particularly those of you who were in the late hours of the day, by asking some questions and also getting a sense. And I think we will talk a bit about this, but the interest in this group is global, and one of our challenges is working out when is the best time for people to get people's attention. So we've got, never mind. We've got 10 in a session, 2 of whom will be Andrew and I, so one of whom is probably Elisa. So that's probably, I think we're probably good, Andrew.
All right. Here we go. Let's see if this works the way that it's supposed to. All right. First question, what country and time zone are you calling into today's virtual plenary from? And I gave a sample answer. You can also
Yeah.
say what time it is if you're not
Yeah.
sure which time zone you're in. We can figure it out.
Amazing. And we can all guess what is that mountain time, I think.
Mountain Daylight
Yeah,
Time.
time. Yeah.
Yep, Mountain Daylight Time. Sorry.
Amazing. All good. No, that's time, yeah, time zones are interesting. As an Aussie living in London, I'm very conscious of um yeah, just saying country doesn't quite cut it really for RDA because it kind of matters where you are. And does that mean that some people have actually moved to summertime already?
The US did last weekend, I think.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we've still got a week, just over a week to go. And I guess Australia will be heading away. Those states that do observe daylight savings time will be moving away from daylight savings.
So looks like a fairly even spread, which I guess since there's only 10 of us, that makes sense. I'm in the Netherlands. That's why I used the example. So I think that's CEST last time I checked. Jenny,
and I'm in Greenwich Mean Time in London in the UK. So yeah, we've got a good span of time zones going on here, which is interesting.
Yeah. Okay. Next question. That was the one that Jenny tried to sneak in before the Woo collab pull.
Yeah.
One veteran, two veteran, four veterans.
Cool. We've got at least one newbie. That's exciting. It's complicated. Yeah. Brilliant.
Figured I'd mix it up a little bit, but
yeah, fair enough. And it's
can the person whose first RDA plenary it is, if you want, identify yourself so we can welcome you personally. That's you, Sarah, I guess.
It is with me. So Sarah Malloy. I am head of library research support at Queen Mary University of London in London in the UK. I'm working with Jenny quite a lot, but this is my first attendance at the RDA plenary.
Well, welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us.
Sorry, clearly wasn't looking very closely at the attendee list. Hello. Sarah's had a lot of emails from me in the last 3 days.
Okay. The next question, is this the first infrastructure for non-traditional research outputs and processes interest group session or call or meeting you have attended? And maybe I assume one of the yeses is you, Sarah. Or no, you were on earlier.
No,
okay, that's
Sarah's
right.
definitely been to here. Thanks to possibly.
It's me, Julia. That is the first. Yeah.
Amazing.
Hi, Julia. Welcome.
And nice to meet you in person, Julia, as well. I think we've swapped some emails. So
yes.
Yeah. Thank you for joining.
Where are you calling in from, Julia?
I'm Boulder, Colorado.
Okay.
US. Yeah.
Great. Does anyone else, the other person, maybe? No pressure. All right.
I'm the second person. It's my first time at your session. But there is a colleague or a member of our community that has been to one of your previous sessions and have very positive things to say and about the interesting things you are looking at. So that's why I'm joining.
Who's that? Not to put you on the spot. So you can think about it. If it comes to mind, let us know.
Yeah. Cool.
But
no, welcome. Thanks for joining.
Welcome, and glad to hear you've heard good things. Hopefully that's reflected in today's session. The next question. What made you choose to attend?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, Jenny.
You've also got Yashiro. I'm not going to get this spelling right, this pronunciation right. Yashiro, also joining for the first time. It's just put in the chat. So welcome.
Oh yeah, I see that now.
Yeah.
Welcome, Yasuhiro. So yeah, this is the final question for this round of questions, which is what made you choose or decide to attend this session over the 4 other ones that you could also be sitting at? I think I know who that is.
Possibly, yeah. I'm looking at faces. So there's lots going on. We've got lots to report back. I think also around how often when there's a meeting every 2 weeks, it's very cool. Is that you, Melroy, or I can't remember if you joined the one in Brisbane or not, but I feel like it would be.
Yep.
Awesome. Yeah, great. And thank you, because I did actually mean to message you to let you know that this was happening, but I'm glad you found it anyway.
And I think the most recent entry is from you, Francoise. Thank you for continuing to ensure the liaison.
And same to you, Julia, around the software source code interest group. I think and that is the joy and the benefit of the plenaries, is that we can connect up with some of the other groups that might be working in complementary areas, shall we say, or aligned areas. And that, and also actually just to that point, probably say this a bit more about this later, but a huge thank you to Francois and all of the work that you've done around liaising and working with us too. It's been certainly been really helpful to have another group who's more established to see kind of how they're managing things.
Yeah. I think that's good for now. So maybe back to the group.
Shall I talk through this one?
Sure.
Yeah.
You want?
Cool.
We didn't practice very much before, so
It's
yes, please.
An ad hoc. It's an informal ad hoc conversation today, I think we can safely say. I guess as I've been there from the beginning, we had quite a lot of conversation about the scope of this group. The idea of non-traditional outputs can include many, many, many different types of outputs and process and forms and formats and types and items. And our initial focus, we talked about, even just the naming of the group. We talked about calling it creative practice. We talked about calling it NTROs. We talked about calling it something else I've forgotten. So there's a lot of conversation about what it might mean.
Non-textual research objects.
Yeah, indeed. Multimodal outputs. So there's lots of vocabulary, I guess, in this area, which can make it challenging at times because each community does have its own say. I mean, in our own view of what this looks like, obviously, well, not obviously perhaps, but in many NTRO-centric disciplines, these are their outputs, and they're not non-traditional for those disciplines. They're very traditional. Another word, actually, a term that's being used more in the UK now is diverse output types, which is a nicer framing, I think. But anyway, we were going to include all of the things, and then the feedback we got from the RDA Technical Design Authority, I think that was the first group that it went through, was we needed to narrow the scope. So that's why, and I think also what we didn't want this to become was just another group talking about the things. It was that focus around the infrastructure is really fundamental to our approach, because actually it's looking at where the infrastructure is working, where it's not working, and where it needs work. So the infrastructure for NTROs and processes, for NTROs interest group, addresses research outputs created through creative practice and multimodal research methodologies, focusing on describing what is created, how it's created, and who is creating it, where current information standards and structures provides inadequate representation. So it's not just about what, it's about how, and it's about who. And that contributorship theme certainly has come up in some of the use cases that have been presented. So that's our scope. That's still quite a broad scope, I'd argue, but it does focus conversations down a little bit, and certainly I think highlights how it interacts with some of the other interest groups represented here today.
Yeah, and maybe just in previous plenary meetings, at least, I think the kickoff interest group meeting at the last plenary, if I recall correctly, even data was sort of touted as a non-traditional research output that folks were interested in, and so we're trying to also stick with that, but also complicate what it means when we talk about data, given the sort of types of disciplines that at least Jenny and I tend to interface with most regularly. So yeah, it's a delicate dance that we're doing to keep things scoped in the way that we've envisioned, without being too restrictive or without letting it become all the things as I think Jenny referred to them as.
Cool. And again, if people want to chip in, feel free to unmute yourself. And contribute. So yeah, a history. I have to say, like this actually dates back to the plenary in Helsinki in 2019, where I first proposed a birds of a feather about this space, and there really wasn't any interest. And I think that, to be fair, is what's exciting about what we're doing now, is that it's taken some time for this to become of more relevance and have more visibility, and that's partly aligned with what's going on in that research evaluation space, and certainly the work that's being done around data stewards and recognizing those roles and technicians and software as outputs, and all of it feels like the time is right now for this group to have come together, but it did take some time, and I think a huge acknowledgement. We've got a couple of co-chairs who can't make it today, Adam Biles-Moore and Robin Burgess, and they've certainly done a lot of work contributing to us getting here, as well as all of the other members of the group who've contributed. But we did run many BOFs. RDA were very patient with us. It took us a while to get this right. We got the interest group proposed and approved after feedback in 2025, and hopefully those of you, if any of you haven't joined the group on the RDA website, please do, because that's where we've got all our links to our documentation and meeting notes, etc. We had our first formal meeting at the last plenary 25 in Brisbane, which did turn into a bit of a me talking at everyone. It felt a bit lecture-like, but we did get some interesting other people in the room who at least were hearing what we're saying. And we've now finally, after a good 2 years, I'd say, work, started some regular working meetings. And today we're doing a bit of a report out and looking at those connections with other groups and planning for the coming months.
So if everyone could go back to your woo clap, if you've navigated away, we have one more question. It's a small group, so we should probably just ask the question, but I think for memory's sake, it's good to keep it logged in the responses list. As Jenny said, we have had regular meetings now for quite some time. We have struggled a bit, or maybe not struggle, but we've been somewhat indecisive about how to go about this. Our meetings have largely been bi-weekly, every other week in that sense. Since the first meeting back in January, or was that previous? I can't remember. And part of why we did that was to see who was joining at different times. So half of the calls basically have been earlier for us in the kind of British, European, Western Europe time zone. Others have been later in the afternoon in those time zones. Obviously, as co-chairs, we have our own preferences, but we also want to make sure that we're accommodating people whose time zones do not exactly align with the majority of the co-chair group. I think we also realize that meeting every 2 weeks is a lot of work, also for Jenny and I, who have been sort of steering the ship for the past little while. Yeah, and so we're thinking of going to a less frequent schedule, which I think is also aligned with many other interest groups and working groups. We see now monthly and quarterly, 5 total responses. I think that is good for us to know. Obviously, there's probably the same challenge that we have on a recurring basis with our standalone interest group meetings than we have here at the plenary, which is this is afternoon time here in Western Europe. And so many of the same people whose opinions we would like are probably not here. So we're also going to send out an email blast with a very short poll about the same question to the group members. But it's good to see that nobody wants to meet bi-weekly. That's good that we're all on the same page. We have yet to set up a date and recurring schedule moving forward, because part of what we were waiting to have this discussion and to see where folks were at. But we will again inform folks via the official RDA channels about what comes next. So thanks again for your input here. Did I miss anything about the frequency and timing, Jenny?
I think all I would say, apologies, I've just had to move rooms, is for those people who are watching this on a recording, please do get in touch, and maybe we can put a poll on the Hoover, Andrew.
Yeah, so
Just
I was saying that we would reach out via the official channels after this to reach those people who are probably not here for the same reasons that they may not be at the other meetings. That said, I think we have seen that the different time zones are drawing folks from the different times of the meetings are drawing folks from different time zones. And actually, I think we've been a bit surprised by how many North Americans have been showing up, even at slightly odd hours for their own time. So that's been encouraging to see the community grow. And I think each meeting we've had at least 2 new people who have not been to previous meetings. So again, I think there's evolving interest, and we're happy to be here as a platform for discussing all these things as the community continues to grow. Here we're going to pivot a little bit to tell you a bit about what we've been doing at the past few meetings. You want me to handle this one, Jenny? Is that
yeah, sure.
Okay. So in our work plan for the interest group, we have a proposal for a sort of gap analysis, and to sort of solicit use cases or case studies from the community in terms of non-traditional research outputs and infrastructural challenges that people are facing, especially. So what we've done is make this one slider template, and we put a few calls out to the community over the past several months. And then, over the past 2 meetings, really, we've started with presentations focused on a specific use case or question or something relating to infrastructure for non-traditional research outputs and processes that someone wanted to bring to the fore. So we've had, notwithstanding anything that Jenny and I have contributed, we've had 3 presentations. These are the kinds of questions that we're asking folks to present to the group in a sort of one slider. So context in terms of discipline and institution or community that's concerned, the types of outputs, processes, or objects that are at stake in the infrastructure and or its challenge. This, again, as you've heard, can include things like performance documentation or portfolios or exhibition records, collections, some information on what the current practice is, how the situation is managed, how these outputs are described, preserved, and shared, the infrastructure that's used to do those things, the gaps that are encountered in the process of carrying out that work, the workarounds that may have been developed due to the challenges, and then sort of desired outcomes, what's the direction of travel, which also helps us understand how this group can possibly be mobilized, or at least folks who are members of this group to focus in a more concerted way on a specific challenge that we encounter, where there's shared energy and time to face it together, because we assume upfront that many of these challenges are shared by many of us within the community. So a sort of quick run through of what we have hosted at the past several meetings. Jenny kicked things off earlier in January with her own sort of vignette or case study or use case. The practice researcher, since this is you, Jenny, I'll let you talk through it.
Thanks, Andrew. Yes, so this, and again, I'll watch the time because I could talk about this for hours and no one wants to hear me do that. So we have been working in this space now for nine years, 10 years, I'd say. And creative practice, particularly in the UK, is not reasonably well understood by the communities, but also a benefit of that is that it's recognized how the infrastructure that's available, your bog standard repository in an institution, doesn't really work for this kind of research. So we were funded to do some scoping projects in 2022 by the Arts and Humanities Research Council to actually look at what we'd built into our institutional repository and how that would scale up at a national level. So that idea, and I guess just some key kind of outcomes of that work, that it's not just about capturing this research, it's how it's presented, and that's really important. That narrative, as Andrew's commented there, the narrative and context and provenance and licensing, there's some really vital information that needs to be captured about this research that's not at the moment. It's not in the information standards or the persistent identifiers. They make an attempt to capture it, but just not very well. So what we've done out of this work, and we've got some research and we're publishing pieces here, there, and everywhere as we go, is that we need this. We've managed to get funding to set up this national repository to do this, but I guess the key point is that it's about capturing process as well as end product. And I think the other thing missing from that description is that this is ongoing in nature. It's not necessarily one-off. It's very difficult, almost impossible for a practice researcher to say that they've finished something. They might have or published even. So I think there's a lot of problems with the current kind of approaches of our scholarly infrastructure that just doesn't work for this group. And the other danger is that there's assumptions that doing things like saying, oh, we now have a category for creative practice, like resolves the problem, when it doesn't, because it still asks for a publication date. So yes, I think there's lots of exciting potential, and that's the other thing I need to do today, PIDFest proposal before I finish. Yeah, I think there's lots of opportunity. And actually what this community teaches us is that they care about their process and their practice, and that capturing practice and process as it's created is something that none of us do very well. It's all focused on the end product outputs. So I'll throw some links in the chat. But really, I guess, and the only other thing to say, we have documented a metadata schema for practice research. I think what's interesting about that is that it picks up what is working in the current infrastructure and what's missing. And we've got things like a really good vocabulary list that talks about types of outputs and item types and all of that. So, and I think that's where there's crossover, kind of particularly with the evaluation of research interest group, and certainly there's work going on in the UK within the Hidden Ref project around better recognition of these outputs. But the danger is that if that doesn't come from discipline communities, ultimately you're having people who don't really necessarily understand the discipline perspective making decisions about how this work should be evaluated. So yeah, so very much that working and sort of reviewing the schema and getting people's input on that will be really useful, and I'll share some links. And yeah, we've got some work going on with calling our repository Enact for those kind of disciplines that create and make and do as their research methods. I think that's probably enough for me. As I said, I'll throw some links into the chat for people if they're interested. Can I hand back over to you, Andrew?
Yeah, sure. So I'm just going to sort of quickly go through the remaining 3 presentations that we've hosted. We have slides from all of them, I think, and they're in a folder in our currently shared interest group. I think that's just for the co-chairs who have access to it for now. But I will say something in a moment about where else we might be able to access those things. But before I do, yeah, there's 3 presentations that remain. One was given by Fotis Mistakopoulos, who works at Operas and Lumen. He lives in Greece, I believe. He presented on knowledge graphs as infrastructure for describing non-traditional research outputs. And sort of the crux of the presentation was about mobilizing the power of knowledge graphs to enhance the status of non-traditional research outputs as first-class scholarly output beyond what he calls flat metadata that we find in repositories otherwise affords. The next presentation was given by Lina Liu from TIB Leibniz on ORKG, the Open Research Knowledge Graph Comparisons tool, function, feature. And I think this was something quite new to most of us on the call. And I still have to sort of look a bit more into it to fully wrap my head around it. But as of now, ORKG has this, ORKG comparisons website where you can effectively select different research outputs and kind of do some documentation and annotation based on selecting 7 papers and kind of comparing what happened in those 7 papers, what methods are used, what the findings were, etc. And then kind of publishing that comparison as its own sort of research output, as far as I've understood it. The idea that Lina brought was actually that right now it is very much sort of text and paper focused. And I think the idea that she has to kind of enrich that ORKG comparisons tool to accommodate a broader range of outputs, including, I guess, non-traditional things that we would call non-traditional research outputs, which also in turn sort of enhances the citability of those outputs by kind of inserting them into this new environment where people can do, different kinds of annotation, such as this comparison exercise. Hopefully I've done justice to Lina's presentation here very quickly. Obviously, these things are hard to fit into 30 seconds, especially if you haven't actually seen the comparisons tool, but we can drop a link into the chat in case you're curious to explore that. And then the most recent, or following Lina's on the last call, we had a presentation from Holly Ranger from the University of Sheffield in the UK about non-traditional research outputs at a STEM-heavy institution. And I think her presentation also reflected some of what we heard from Jenny today, and probably reflects much of what the rest of us think about and encounter, which is thinking, understanding how practice research, the sense that researchers, but also support professionals, librarians, et cetera, feel that, non-traditional research outputs are not currently visible, supported, or valued in the way that they should be. And this is perhaps especially the case at a STEM-heavy university like Sheffield, which is where Holly is based. And she also sort of discussed this in the context of the ref in the UK that Jenny also mentioned. So I think just focusing on a commonality that we've found now in Fotis's presentation as well as Holly's presentation is that the idea of Fotis was really talking about more formalized taxonomies and ontologies and other kinds of knowledge models. In Holly's case, this was more just based on the types of outputs that she enumerated in her presentation. But we've heard voices from among meeting attendees so far in developing some kind of list, and that could start as a list and turn into a vocabulary or a taxonomy or an ontology. But I think a list is probably a safe place to start. I think that's maybe a point of conversation for those of you on the call today. I know that Francoise, you were not to single you out, but I think you were very favorable to that kind of output from this group, again, in a sort of more short-term way, but also as an ongoing thing, because obviously our one-slider template specifically asks folks to talk about the types of outputs that they are dealing with in any given case study. So yeah, does that sound like something that you all would be interested in? We have also seen in at least Fotis's presentation, there were folks on the call who pointed us in the direction of other stuff that was already going on. So if there's other, again, vocabularies or schemas out there that might actually be capturing at least some of these kinds of things, that would also be good to know about. We, know some about what's happening in the space, but there's a lot happening everywhere and hard to keep track of all of it. So maybe I'll just pause there and open it up for the group. And maybe Francoise, since you've turned your camera on, I know that your thinking is also about the overlaps with what's happening in the evaluation of research interest group. So maybe you want to say a few words about that?
Yes, I think that to try to extract from your cases an evolving list of non-traditional research outputs is a way to also use the presentations you have of the use cases, and there is a huge diversity, and so it's a good way to build on what we hear when we listen to your use cases. As you say, they are also sources of lists of NTROs, and they have to be explored. But in this case, it's a bottom-up view on the reality of your use cases, which can bring interesting input in terms of vocabularies and kind of topics which are under non-traditional research outputs. What we do what we are beginning to do in the evaluation of research interest group is to think about how RDA can contribute to thoughts around disciplinary aspects of research activity and products, building on the diversity of the RDA community. And so I think it's really complementary to what you could do with a closer view to what NTROs can be, because they are in that landscape also.
Great. Thanks for sharing that little bit with the rest of us. Does anyone know of a list that exists? Maybe that's a good. Nothing really.
I guess the closest we've come is let me just grab the GitHub link, our schema documentation. And I think actually what might be, if you have a look at the Zenodo link I've just shared, I think what's really interesting about it, and it kind of does lend itself to this idea of having some kind of list, although lists may maintenance. But if you look at the vocabularies we've documented in the Open Repositories paper last year, like there's the schema doc. I mean, it's not just traditional kind of metadata type like scholarly infrastructure standards. There's schema.org, there's ref categories, there's all sorts of different spaces where these things are. There's an attempt to kind of document the different output types, but and I think I can attest to this, every institutional and discipline repository in the world will have a slightly different way of describing all of these items. And obviously, you have the COAR with an A standard, and you have DataCite, and you have, ORCID has a different view. Like, it just, every single space is a bit different. But actually there is stuff out there. It's just in different places.
Thanks, Jenny. Any other thoughts about lists? I mean, I guess we can approach this from different angles, right? One is just to say, well, these are the presentations we've hosted. These are the case studies, and here's just a running list of things. But then, of course, like you said, there are other resources out there, each of which talks about things in its own way, and how do we tackle that in a way that's useful for others in the community, without or given the constraints that everyone has in terms of the time we can spend on RDA activities. Obviously, some of us are doing this in the rest of our lives, so that's an easy way to map, but others perhaps less so. So maybe we put that on the agenda in addition to coming up with the list, is to think about what method and where to put it, and what actually the possible uses are beyond what Francois has already shared in terms of thinking how that can be used to look at evaluation, or at least discipline-specific approaches to evaluation. Maybe that's a good lead into what I think is on the next slide, which is to share with you, in case you have not yet seen it. We've spun up a little Zotero library. I think that was not mentioned as a output or resource that would come out of this group, but I think we're starting to realize, including on today's call, that there's lots of links that show up in sessions that sometimes make their way into the notes document, but sometimes that's as far as they get. So we decided to create this open community Zotero group to keep track of those kinds of things that folks are sharing. It's not currently very well populated or very well curated, but again, if we just look at the 4 links that are in front of me right now, that's something that could very easily end up in our list of resources in the group. Another thought, again, is to create snapshots of the one-sliders that we're collecting with the case study presentations, so that they can at least have a record that lives with the rest of the things that we're working with in this group. And obviously these things evolve over time, and we can think better about how to organize them and how to put them to use. But it's just to say it's there. You should be able to join or add it to your own personal libraries. If you have any issues with that, please let me know. I think I made it a I can't remember the vocabulary that Zotero uses, but the configurations are not fully public, because if it's a fully public one, you can't actually get document storage. So it's one step down from a fully public. So you may have to join maybe in order to add, but the advantage now is that by adding, you can also add the full file rather than just the record. Maybe not a big deal, but figured I'd mention it. So yeah, if you have issues adding it, please do let me know.
Yeah, it's a public group with the closed membership.
Yes,
That's technical term.
Yes. So it's read only unless you join the group.
Which is sensible, because I think, some people just want to look at it, whereas others.
Yeah. Yeah, so now you've seen a bit of what's come up so far. We've been in touch with other folks, and maybe I'll pass this off to you, Jenny, in terms of upcoming case studies.
We've had one volunteer, Amy Robinson, who's at Glasgow School of Arts, based in Scotland in the UK, who works at a very anti-Eurocentric disciplines institution, as is possibly obvious by the location. So Amy's been doing some work around their institutional repository in this space. So Amy's volunteered. I think Amy's also done a bit of work with Robin, our co-chair, who used to work at Glasgow School of Art. So Amy's offered to give a case study presentation on the work that she's doing with their institutional repository. So that's exciting. And the other kind of group that certainly has been recommended to us a few times, and they're doing a lot of work around capturing multimodal research, is the NFDIS for Culture, based in Germany. So we had Lina from one of the other NFDISs, and this one would be the Culture one. And I think it's interesting, the kind of, and this is actually where the crossover with the collections as data group comes in. Another RDA group we're in conversations with is that certainly that practice research approach is different to that cultural heritage collections approach. There's certainly crossover and alignment, but they are fundamentally different approaches from a structural metadata perspective. So yeah, so they're on the list, and we are hoping to broaden out the kind of use cases and proposals. I'm hoping we're working with a project taking place in Canada called the Arts Impact Project. I'm hoping they might be able to come and present something at some point. And looking at Melroy here, who I'm not going to turn your camera on, but I know there might be some connections in Australia as well. It'd be great to get some case studies just about what's going on in other places, because we are very conscious it's a bit Europe centric at the moment. And to be fair, also just to shout out to all of the work that's been done in Australia in this space and the guidance and the framework that's been developed. That's all certainly still relevant and useful. Oh, Beth, hello, thank you. Yes, I was reading your data sheets where I think this is the other thing. Andrew and I realised we started off at this, we feel like we have to meet every fortnight, and then we realised actually we don't have to do this in 3 months. We can do this over, a year or two. So I'm really interested and excited and looking forward to the plenary in London in October to find out more about what's going on with the data sheets work there. So yeah, so I think, and maybe later in the year, there'll be some space and time for some of that work to be highlighted as part of this group. So I think that's it at the moment. So again, I guess it's really, and this is for people who are on the call now and for people who are listening to this post plenary, please do get in touch with ideas for case studies, because we want to bring in all sorts of ideas and thoughts. I guess actually the other thing I've not really mentioned today so far is RAID and the research activity identifier in this space and exciting potential in to help make this work more visible. I think that's probably it at the moment. Although again, if people have got suggestions, ideas, like projects they can link to or people they can go away and talk to, that would be amazing.
Or yeah, even if it's not a case study necessarily,
Yep.
if there's an interesting tool or workaround or whatever it is that you've come across, it doesn't exactly have to be a challenge, right? It could also be sharing things that do work, if those things actually exist. So yeah, one example maybe of something slightly orthogonal that has come up also in our discussions with Francoise and the evaluation of research folks is on one of, I think it was the last call actually, or 2 calls ago, Fotis shared a recent report from the Morphs project based in the UK on open research practices in the social sciences. And so now we are kind of planning together with the evaluation of research group to invite some of the authors from that Morphs team to come for a sort of brief presentation on the Morphs project, and again a sort of broader conversation about both the kind of non-traditional research output and process side and how that links up with open research practices and from their evaluation practices in the social sciences. So it doesn't need to be an infrastructure or a tool even. I think it could be an interesting topic more generally.
Yes, and I can add that from the subgroup which is beginning to tackle disciplinary aspects, we also had the issue of the difference of approaches between qualitative and quantitative approaches in social sciences, and I think it's something we could we have a reference, and I think you can help us to build a contact with these people. And so if we can also organize something with them, it would be really nice.
Yeah, great. And like we said earlier this week, we're happy to help set that up. And I think that will be an interesting conversation as well. I saw that Jenny, you already dropped the morphs link, and then I also dropped the morphs link because I didn't see it until after.
Okay.
Enjoy.
Better twice than none at all.
Yeah. So yeah, the previously mentioned morphs report is now in the chat. It's also actually in our Zotero library. I saw, Lisa, that you requested to join the library, so I think it's working as intended. And again, feel free to send a request to the rest of you if you'd like to follow along. Let's see, we're coming up on an hour here. Maybe we'll quickly pivot to something that has already come up a few times already. This is our liaisons with other RDA groups. We've probably said enough about what's been happening in our relationships with the evaluation of research group. I think that's probably the most developed so far. We had an initial kind of joint co-chairs call back in December, January. And then out of that, we kind of decided that we would designate one interest group co-chair to sort of attend the other group's meetings. So that's why Francoise has been faithfully following our activities, and I in turn will be following the activities of the evaluation of research interest group. We had sort of a little bit of a joint discussion built into their call yesterday afternoon, and again today we have more informally discussed and addressed that evolving relationship. But as Jenny mentioned, there's several others that are on the table. So one is collections as data. We've initiated contact with the co-chairs, and we're looking towards plenary 27. Beth, I think this is also what we were talking about with you. We have the software as source code interest group, which again, Julia is on the call today. I think that there definitely is a role to think about software in the context that we're thinking about it. And I suspect maybe the conversation is different in this space than it might be in more orthodox, in the Netherlands, we beta science, hard science coding. I can at least reflect anecdotally on a couple of my conversations that I've had with researchers in the institutes where I work who are actually developing code, but much less so from a kind of scientific development perspective. These are folks working again with experimental artistic methods, and their disposition I find to be quite different, and maybe presenting different kinds of challenges when it comes to thinking about how to document and how to archive and whether to archive at all. So yeah, I think there's interesting things that we'll encounter in as we move along. I don't know if you want to say anything about your interest group here, Julia. Just so the others are also aware, I do not feel well equipped to speak on your behalf here.
Yeah. I think I would need more information, or I do need more information to understand how you're thinking about software versus how I personally and how our group has thought about software. What actually comes to mind as I'm listening to this is there was an interest group, the Empirical Humanities Metadata Working Group, which included some people who study the software developers. But we focused less on the practice of creating software and more on the output itself. So there probably is some room for discussion here. In summary,
Yeah.
it's not clear to me the overlap, but I wouldn't rule it out either.
Yeah, I think that's I think we're probably on the same page there.
Yeah.
But again, that's why having some presence at each other's events and activities, at least from time to time, to see where those conversations are going. Because I assume the closer we follow each other's work, the more we'll find relevant as an overlap.
Right, right.
So no pressure if it's not immediately apparent. but I'm confident there will be links to be made there.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's worth a follow-up with the co-chairs of each group to do some more brainstorming. Our group hasn't been super active as the interest group per se over the last few years, but there have been a couple of working groups that have spun off, done their thing, and wrapped up that are kind of under our umbrella. So that's the mode we're in at the moment.
And the empirical humanities metadata group, this was like the Fortunes and Lindsay Poirier and those folks?
Exactly,
Yeah,
exactly. And they've not been active for some time now, is my understanding. But it tickled my memory because they had more of a focus on the practice of um, how they're studying and how they're documenting these empirical
yeah,
studies or these humanities studies.
yeah. Um, yeah, that's and I think the story goes, for those who are maybe less familiar, this is an interest group that is now dormant. But it was initiated by actually a group of anthropologists who
Yep.
are at least currently based at UC Irvine, and Lindsay is now at somewhere in Massachusetts, Smith? No.
Yeah, I can't remember where she's
Yeah,
at.
I think she's at Smith. So they have a tool called the Platform for Experimental Collaborative Ethnography, or PEACE, and so they had created this interest group also to kind of learn from good practices within the RDA to also bring back in the design of this tool that they have now developed. I can also link to that in the chat. Yeah, I'm in touch with those folks, and I think you're pointing that out as a resonant thing here is
Okay.
very sensible. So thanks for that. We have the Professionalizing Data Stewardship Interest Group, which I know you, Lisa, are very active with, and I think I recall from our first meeting of this group, you had suggested that there are bonds to forge, but I think everyone's just been busy and overwhelmed by everything else in our lives. But this is definitely something that I think we will inevitably take forward. My recollection, again, this is many months ago, was also in terms of kind of skills and capacities for data stewards who may be working with communities who are working with these non-traditional research outputs. But I can also let you speak for yourself, Lisa.
Yeah, no, I think the overlap that I saw at the time remains still the same. And I think it's also a very good time to explore this overlap because professionalizing data stewardship interest group, we have triggered our statement of work review process because we realized that our statement of work is 5.5 years old, which in the world of data stewardship is like ancient. And so we're now, for the next couple of months, we are doing a lot of introspection and reflection in terms of where the interest group is going as a whole, and what are some of the topics that we want to focus on for the coming 5 years. So it will be a very good time to also explore new overlaps with new groups like this one, because obviously in our original statement of work, or charter as it was called then, we listed some interest in working groups. Some of them are now dormant, some of them are not that relevant. But there's, new groups like this one where I think there might be overlaps, and so it would be really good to explore them together. So perhaps also try to find time to bring the PDS co-chairs together with you four and try to see if we could, identify where the overlaps are, and if there's any concrete steps that we want to take, or if it's more that we recognize that there is, some shared interest and we just keep an eye on each other's activities.
Yeah, great. I mean, I know I try and show up to those meetings when I'm able, and I actually was really excited about your session during this plenary, but 11:30 the other night was not an opportune time for me to.
Yeah, no, having done two 11:30 sessions because the data steward career tracks on Monday was the same slot. I completely understand anybody who did not want to stay awake, get up, or, engage at midnight. So, no hard feelings.
If it makes you feel any better, I only couldn't attend at 11:30 because I was up at 4 o'clock in the morning 3 days this week. So it's, it'll get you one way or the other. I hope. How was attended? Was it well attended?
It was decently attended. I wouldn't call it well attended, but both sessions were very productive. So the people who did show up also, I think, in order to stay awake, were very actively engaged. So it was good.
Good. There's always that as well. Cool. Thanks. I added one other initiative. Maybe some of you on the call today were on this call the other day. This was a Birds of a Feather on data ethics that Nathaniel, his name's not coming to me, as well as Sabina Leonelli. So it's Sabina Leonelli's group at to Munich, together with other folks, including Louise Bezauderhout, who also works at one of the two institutes where I work here in Leiden. Yeah, this is a BOF about data ethics. I think there was a lot of excitement and enthusiasm on the call for that to evolve, including the director general of RDA herself, who had encouraged the group to pursue interest group formation. So yeah, I think that's doing something that's not being done elsewhere. And during that conversation, Louise actually specifically mentioned different kinds of outputs and thinking about, yeah, the ethical issues that underlie not just data itself, but the many other things that are produced in the process of doing research. So I kind of left a comment in the chat just to say that we as an interest group would be very happy to liaise with them as they evolve. And yeah, I think that will prove to be an interesting link eventually. So just putting it down here. Are you all involved in anything else here at the RDA that we may have missed? It's a small group, so probably not too much, but Beth, I hear you're audible. Do you want to jump in here?
Yeah, we're not really an official interest group. We're not an official working group even. We exist only as a coordination group. But the RDA ambassadors has actually started to become a little bit more active. And I think similar to the evaluation of research IG, within the ambassador group, there's going to be people who are going to relate to this type of work or would be interested in bringing forward what this group is doing to a kind of cross-community discussion that is being facilitated by those group meetings. So I would flag that as another audience or someone to connect with. And at the very least, because they've got like kind of ambassador in the name, they're likely to also promote and talk about your work in other spaces, even if it isn't directly related to what they're doing.
Yeah, that's a really great suggestion. Sorry, Jenny, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, no, that is amazing. Thanks, Beth, because I think we're very conscious that we're possibly the only group that starts with the arts and humanities perspective. Well, actually, to be fair, that's unfair. Yours is as well, but I think there's very few of us. Most RDA groups are very STEM driven and heavy, and that's completely understandable. And yeah, so no, that's a really good mechanism to try and just find our change agents to do some of the work for us, because I think I would say a lot, I would say probably most of the people we brought who have joined the group are coming from a very specific creative practice, arts and humanities perspective, and that's really important. But actually, it's that we're missing a translation piece about how we kind of connect between that and the rest of RDA.
Yeah, I totally sympathize. The collections as data interest group, there's definitely like a humanities bent there, in that a lot of collections professionals think of humanities users as their main audience or their main contributors. But it is, you made the case earlier, it is slightly different too. We're not exactly working with the same frameworks. We're trying to document stuff in a very different way for, again, slightly different purposes and slightly different audiences. But yeah, that group has been a little bit quiet. We started out pretty strong with regular monthly meetings, and we sort of had a hard time actually finding our way because there were so many things that we wanted to talk about. And a lot of it was, the thing that you do in an interest group, you raise a lot of questions and then you sit around going, I don't have answers to this yet. And I don't know where I want to put my energy. I don't know how to actually pick one of these things and move forward. But what we did was a survey of our group last fall, autumn, in the Northern Hemisphere. And we got kind of feedback on like they'd like to meet slightly less often, but with a little bit more thematic guidance around what those meetings were going to be about. So we're going to focus on data sheets this year. And initially, we had a proposal for the Australian plenary that unfortunately none of the chairs actually were able to go to the Australian plenary. So we missed out on being able to host that session. But we were looking at relationships between data sheets and DMPs and whether or not the kinds of material that collections professionals, the kinds of documentation that collections professionals would put out would ultimately be things that would be easily captured and used in a researcher's DMP to kind of facilitate better documentation down the line. But it could go the other way too, like someone who's creating, someone who's working in the arts, in all likelihood will one day donate some portion of their output to a museum or to an archive, and the stuff that goes into a DMP could then facilitate the writing of a data sheet. And I still want to pursue that, but we kind of needed to step back and get more institutions on board with like, what even are data sheets and how are we using these data sheets before we really build interoperability into it. But I think that's a direction we're going in, especially if we put a lot more energy into data sheets, then we want to pull in this, we want to go back to that discussion of data sheets and DMPs.
On that note, Beth, just to flag it for right now, and maybe we can follow up after if there's something worth following up about. But here in the Netherlands, early next month, and I think Jenny's actually going to be here on the same day, it so happens. There's a consortium of like 4 of the art academies that are each attached to a University of Applied Science here in the Netherlands, and they're having a Data in the Arts Day. There's kind of 3 workshops that they're doing, and one is specifically about DMPs for data in the arts. I don't know why this didn't click before, but I'm glad that it's clicking now at least, because I think that might be an interesting intervention. I'm not sure how much room I have to intervene in that as of now, but I can help put folks in touch if that's of interest.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That would be great. Like I'm sure we're not the only ones who are trying to figure out how collections, heritage material, and arts material can fit into DMPs because everybody's required to create DMPs now, right? But I don't know who those people are who are having those conversations and progressing things. So it's great to have any connections.
Let me drop a link in here just so you can see the advertisement, and I'm also organizing or helping them organize one of the 3 sessions, which is also actually kind of about what outputs people are working with and what their visions are for long-term preservation. So let me find the link quickly and I'll post it in the chat.
Yeah, and I guess just while Andrew's doing that, I guess just flagging too, we enact the repository for practice research we're building is part of AHRC, Arts and Humanities Research Council's Infrastructure for Digital Arts and Humanities program. And so we've got DISCO UK and the museum's data service as part of that community as well. And so there are probably other data services in that community that will have crossover with the work you're doing too. So I think, and my feedback from that group last week when I mentioned it was that I think Disco had been involved, but it had just all like the RDA is a bit of a beast at times, and I think it just became a bit too much. But I think if there's clear kind of like alignment, then there might be potential for them to those services to engage as well as enact as well. But yeah, so no, I think there's opportunities, and as RDA is in London in October, hopefully the time is right for collaboration.
I just posted the announcement for this event in the chat.
Which I'm going to go crash as I happen to be in Amsterdam.
Well, that was our last slide, but we have 13 minutes left in case. And actually, maybe Beth, I think I also heard your point about frequency and about focus, which I think is something that we're also struggling with, and we have maybe to be a little reflexive about our own activities. We're trying to reach out to RDA to kind of share, because I think so far getting the thing off the ground, it's throwing spaghetti at the wall in some ways, but you can only throw spaghetti at the wall for so long. I know that, again, Jenny has projects that she's working on that she would like to sort of bring in to see what kind of coordination can feed into that, and that can feed into, I have other stuff. Again, we have members who are bringing their own stuff, but yeah, eventually that's why I think maybe this list is something more tangible that can be a focus for at least a portion of the coming calls to think about how to do that. But I'm sure there's others, and yeah, I think it is a challenge balancing frequency and also not necessarily knowing who's going to show up, because again, I think at least we're in the early phases, so we have a lot of new people from one call to the next. I imagine at some point things consolidate a little bit, but how do you manage all these different moving pieces?
Yeah, no, it's totally a challenge. And ultimately, as co-chairs, you have the power of picking the times that suit you the best, because like you need to be there. You need to be the one who's driving it. And so in our group as well, we were leaning into like kind of European friendly time zones. And we had a co-chair in Australia who unfortunately had to step back. And now we've got a new co-chair in Australia. So at least like there'll be meeting times now that would be more available to people who, aren't awake when the sun is up over Ireland.
Yeah, and we also have a co-chair in Australia who I think has been less active, in part because of our preference
Yeah.
so far for these kinds of time zones. But again, there's a watch along in Australia that's happening, and so this is maybe a sign of hope that we can think in a more concerted way of how to do that, so that it's not just at whatever ungodly hour for people who may well want to show up and contribute.
Yeah, I mean, I think that struggle that I see for this group is maybe that there's both Australia and the Americas involved, and that's where it gets really difficult to find a time that does right by everybody. And time alternation or meeting alternation is something that unfortunately rarely works. I think I've seen it only working for one group effectively. But I think I agree with Beth's take on this, that at the end of the day, the co-chairs need to be able to attend and stay sane attending. So, not have meetings that are consistently at a time that really don't work for you, or, don't work with your biorhythms. and then, take it from there. And I think it's, you just look at like half a globe, it becomes slightly easier. It's really difficult to capture the whole globe.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think I know with the National Fit Strategies interest group, what they do is they have meetings alternately in different time zones. And because they've got coaches from Australia, Canada, and the Europe, what they do is two coaches are there in a time zone that suits Asia Pacific, and then the next meeting is at a more European, North American friendly time zone where the other two coaches are there. And the next meeting then is again in an APAC time zone, and then again in a this. So they keep alternating it and ensure that there is at least a summary of what was covered in the previous meeting at the next one so that everyone's across the board. Then the coaches do meet among themselves. I'm not sure what the frequency of that is, but yeah, with the larger community, there's always these two meetings. I'm not sure if that helps or if that sort of format would work. I know interest groups are all different. Sometimes it's not possible to do it, but yeah.
No, that's really helpful. Thank you, Melroy. I think, to be honest, I think some of it's just silly things like we set up a recurrent Zoom but didn't put a meeting invitation in people's diaries, and so like we were losing people that way. I think because we've been trying to meet every 2 weeks. It's just been too much organizing, and so actually just doing things like reducing the frequency, settling on a consistent kind of timing, but sticking to two. All of those kind of things will help us kind of settle into a bit more of a rhythm than.
Mallory's example is then a second group that I know where it happens successfully, because the one that I was thinking is the Fair Mappings working group, and they alternate in the same way that they have a co-chair that sits in Japan. And they have European-based co-chairs, and they alternate with understanding that when it's working time in Japan, then the Japanese co-chair is always present, and when it's more office hour time in Europe, then the European co-chairs are present, and there's no expectation that they attend the wee hours of the day meetings. But then they have co-chairs meetings where the co-chairs coordinate among themselves.
Well, I think that once we do this watch along with the Australian folks, we'll get a signal in one direction or the other. So hi again to our Australian colleagues who may be watching this at a later time. We look forward to your participation, but if there's not a critical mass of folks, at least for now, from Australia who really do want to participate, then continuing to switch times back and forth may not be the most sensible thing. So between that and the email blast poll that I think we'll send out next week to see among our members who would like to make it but can't because of those time zone issues, we'll be in a better place to make a decision for the next, at least between now and the next plenary.
Yeah, and I guess also just a bit of a call to action to our counterparts in Australia, New Zealand, Asia Pacific. Yeah, we want to hear from you. So yeah, understanding how it could work would be great. And also actually kind of conscious of time, but a huge thank you. I just want to say to Andrew for today's session, because I have to admit that I dropped the ball on a pile of things today. So thank you, Andrew, for all of your
That's all right.
work.
I dropped the ball on a pile of things yesterday. So
we worked well together, but yeah, today was a bit nuts.
So thank you, Jenny, for making the pass that I could pick up at whatever ungodly hour I was up at this morning.
Yeah, it's a team effort.
Thanks to all of you for sticking it out for the majority of the hour and a half that we've been together, and for your feedback and advice and empathy, all very much appreciated. Yeah, maybe we call that a day for now. Maybe some folks want to take a breather before the plenary starts. Is that like immediately after this? It is, isn't it? Is it at 4? No, it's at 4:30 European time. Well, anyway, we'll call it a day for now. We'll follow up. Beth, maybe I'll follow up with you about this DMP thing. And Jenny, I give you the final word because I've blabbed enough today.
Just a huge thank you, everyone. Just really, really exciting to see such interesting or hear such interesting conversation and to see the potential and just thank you for yeah, the learnings of all of you, because I think we are still pretty new at this, so we appreciate the support and look forward to more focused engagement. Perhaps that's the point to end on going forward.
Yeah. All right. See you all sooner and later on various channels.
Thank you. Bye.